It's the middle of winter, 20,000 years ago, and you haven't seen the sun break through the clouds in what feels like weeks. The ground outside is iron hard. Nothing is growing. Nothing is going to grow for months. And every animal you'd normally hunt has either migrated somewhere warmer or gotten very, very good at not being found. So here's a question almost nobody stops to ask. For most of human history, roughly a third of every single year looked like this. Cold, dark, empty. No supermarket, no heating, no little calendar telling you spring is 11 weeks away. So what did people actually do all winter? How did they not starve? And honestly, stuck inside for months with the same handful of faces, how did they not lose their minds? By the end of this, you might realize something strange. They may have handled winter better than you do. Let's start with the obvious enemy, the cold itself. When it's that cold, fire isn't a nice touch. It's the entire day. It's warmth. It's light in a world where the sun clocks out by mid-afternoon. It's how you cook. It's the thing keeping wolves on the far side of the dark. Which means one job quietly mattered more than any other. Somebody always kept the fire alive. Let it die on a January night, and there was no lighter in your pocket to bring it back. Just a long, dangerous scramble in the dark. When archaeologists dig up these old winter camps, they find hearths used over and over in the exact same spot for generations. A fire that was, in a real sense, never allowed to go out. There was a hidden cost to all of this, though. Live your whole life pressed up against a fire inside an enclosed shelter, and you breathe smoke. A lot of it. We actually know this because it left marks. Traces of soot have turned up in the lungs and sinuses of ancient remains. Winter kept you alive and slowly filled your chest with the very thing keeping you warm. Survival back then was never clean. It was just survival. But here's the thing about fire. It only warms the part of you facing it. Turn around and your back remembers you're standing in an ice age. So to actually survive, you had to carry warmth with you, on your body. And this is where ancient humans were secretly brilliant. Forget the cartoon caveman in one loose bearskin. That's a costume, not a survival strategy. Real people in the cold sewed. Roughly 40,000 years ago, someone carved a needle out of bone, drilled a tiny eye into one end, and changed everything. Because a needle means thread, and thread means fitted, layered, tailored clothing. Not a hide thrown over your shoulders, but sleeves, seams, closed seams that trap warm air against your skin. The gap between a loose skin and a properly stitched garment is, some nights, the gap between waking up and not. So think about that for a second. You zipped up a coat this morning without a single thought. Someone, 20,000 years ago with a splinter of bone and an enormous amount of patience, invented the whole reason that coat works. Okay, you're warm. Now for the harder problem, you have to eat, and you can't hunt what isn't there. Which means the secret to surviving winter didn't actually happen in winter. It happened in autumn. The whole cold season was won or lost months earlier, in a frantic stretch of gathering and hunting and, above all, storing. They dried meat. They smoked it. And in the frozen north, they had the best refrigerator ever built. The entire outdoors. A carcass buried in a snowbank in December was still food in February. Not everyone stayed put, though. Some groups did the exact opposite. They followed the food. When the great herds of reindeer and mammoth moved on to find winter grazing, people moved with them, living on the hoof, betting their lives on staying close to the animals that were, quite literally, walking meals. Stay and store or follow and hunt. Winter forced a choice, and both answers were a gamble. But here's the twist most people get completely wrong. What they were really hunting for wasn't meat. It was fat. This sounds strange until you learn one grim fact. You cannot survive on lean meat alone. Eat nothing but rabbit, nothing but pure protein with no fat, and your body slowly breaks down trying to process it. There's actually a name for it: rabbit starvation. You can eat all day, feel full, and still be starving to death. So the real prize in a winter kill was never the lean muscle everyone pictures. It was the marrow inside the bones, the organs, the thick fat around them. In the depth of winter, a fat animal was worth more than any amount of gold you could imagine. So where did you spend all these months exactly? A lot of the time, in caves and rock shelters, natural walls against the wind. But not always. Sometimes, astonishingly, they built. In what's now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered homes made almost entirely out of mammoth bones. Dozens upon dozens of them, jawbones stacked into walls, tusks curving up to frame a doorway. Roughly 15,000 years old. A house of bones, sealed with hides, warm and glowing inside while the wind screamed itself hoarse outside. And now we reach the real question. The one that isn't about survival at all. Because the cold, you can fight. The hunger, you can plan for. But what do you do with all that time? The days are short. The nights are enormous. You are inside, close to the fire, for hour after hour after hour. And this is when ancient humans did everything else that makes us human. They fixed their tools by firelight. They carved. Needle by needle, they made next year's clothes before next year even arrived. They taught the children how to shape a blade, which plants to trust, where the herds would be when the snow finally broke. A whole winter was a school with no walls, and the fire was the only classroom. They made small toys. They played games we'll never know the rules to. And more than anything, they talked. This is the part we've genuinely lost. Winter didn't just allow people to be together. It forced it. You could not physically wander off to be alone. Your whole world was the few bodies crowded around that fire, sharing heat, sharing food, sharing the same long dark. And out of those endless evenings came the things we still find in the ground. Stories, passed down until they became the first myths. Small carved figurines. The paintings pressed deep into the black heart of caves. A lot of what we now call culture may have been born in winter. By firelight, in the cold, simply because there was nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. Now hold that image next to your winter. You have a thermostat. You can make it summer in your living room with your thumb. You will spend this winter warmer and safer than any ancient human ever dreamed possible, and a lot of it you'll probably spend alone. On a couch, holding a small glowing rectangle. Feeling a little flat, a little low, and not quite able to say why. We beat the cold. We just quietly let the loneliness back in through the side door. Because here's what's easy to miss. For them, winter wasn't only about survival. It was also rest. The frantic, exhausting pace of the warm months finally eased off. It was slower, closer. A season of staying put with your people and waiting. Waiting is a skill we've almost completely forgotten. They had no way to rush spring, no button to skip the boring part, so they learned to simply be inside the dark months, to fill them with warmth and voices, and the slow making of things. The waiting wasn't wasted time. In a way, the waiting was the whole point. And that pull you feel every single year, the urge to stay in, to eat heavier food, to sleep a little longer, to gather with the handful of people you actually love, that isn't laziness. That's 20,000 years of winter, still quietly humming somewhere inside you. So, what did ancient humans do all winter? They kept a fire alive. They ate fat and told stories. They sewed and carved and slept close together, and they waited for the light to come back. It was cold, and it was hard, and some of them didn't make it to spring. But not one of them spent it alone. Nobody scrolled through a dark month wondering where everybody went. And when you really picture it, wrapped in fur, you stitched with your own hands, inside a house of mammoth bones, surrounded by every single person who would die to keep you alive. Yeah, it might have been a better winter than yours.